touched by the sunshine and sun.
We're still not hearing you, Dr. Hines.
Shall we go to
Vish, I'm sorry, I had some technical issue here. Can you just repeat the question?
so you want to give your insight, your views of what are some of the issues, topics?
But I think for me to really answer that question, I'll give you a simple answer. What might be different during this election, right? Come 2025. I think for one, you have these hanging on us, everything we're seeing happening, interested in regime change. And I think they would prefer to keep the current administration in office. And again, I'm basing that on what's coming out from the State Department and the actions by the U.S. government in terms of what's happening in Guyana. And I think the third of resources stake in this election. And I don't think, even if the PNC would have a bingo, so that's going to go a long way to help them in that campaign, right? Those three things that I mentioned, I do believe that the PVP, but I do think they will do much better than the last election. A hype to what's going on, but that's it. I can tell you, what we're seeing. I think one thing I do regret, I should say, is that the language on all sides has been very demeaning, and it makes it seem that hit. I don't agree with some of the words he used, but there are others who are in the playing field who have used language, that makes one wonder, what kind of a society and culture we're dealing with. So I will leave it at that.
Okay, so on the issue of Venezuela, I think all of the political parties are on the same page, and therefore they will not play much into that because there is no gain really for any one of them on the Venezuela matter because they're united. Social media, Dr. Hines, what are you forecasting? What are you seeing for 2025?
Dr. Hines, we're still not hearing you.
No?
Yes, we're hearing you now.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I want to get the language very right tonight because we have become a country that has become language connoisseurs, and I want to get the language right tonight. I'm going to go in another direction. This upcoming election is the first election in which the country is going to be a full-fledged petrol state. And a full-fledged petrol state comes with some factors that we have not seen before. And those factors are going to have an impact on the election. The petrol state gives the government an enormous amount of money that it never had before. The petrol state brings with it a high degree of corruption. A petrol state within the context of an ethnically divided society raises the bar when it comes to the distribution of resources. In ethnically divided societies, the question of distribution of resources is always at a very high tempo. With the advent of a petrol state, when you add the petrol state to ethnic division, you have a more contested more contested situation as far as the distribution of resources is concerned. We are entering an election where, once again, our country, partly because of the petrol state, has become very much part of geopolitics. A geopolitics which, of course, has been sharpened with the advent of the new administration in the United States of America. We are in a neighborhood with Venezuela, and that makes us very, very vulnerable as a country. Vulnerable internally, but also, and more importantly, vulnerable externally. It means, therefore, that external actors will have more than a passing interest in our election. We have had the experience in the past of the intervention of external forces within the context of geopolitics, going as far back as the 1950s, coming to a head in the 1960s, and then as we moved into the 1990s, we saw it again. And now, with the petrol state, with the neighborhood, with Venezuela, external players are going to have more than a passing interest in the elections. This election would be played out within the context of a heightened ethno-racial environment where ethnic communities are going to be in the mode of defending their communities from the incursions from outside. This has always been an issue in our politics, but in the context of the petrol state, in the context of increased resources to the one-party government that we have, we're in a take-all government, the question of ethnic territory will be heightened. When you take all of those into consideration and you add them to, as we stand today, if the elections were to be held today, it would be an election in which the major players are not agreed on the rules of the engagement. And that is a very, very important aspect. We are entering an election in which the electoral body is not enjoying the confidence of the broad section of the society. If you go back to a poll that the IRI did a couple of years ago, where it was found that a mere 30% of the population believed that the last election was free and fair. And that would, of course, include supporters of the winners of those elections. Now, I introduce these factors because I think, going off on who will win and who wouldn't win will get us nowhere in a conversation of this nature. A conversation of this nature, to my mind, has to lay the cards on the table, lay the challenges on the table, because there are challenges on the table. Some of the challenges are known, some are unknown. Some of the challenges, as I pointed out, are heightened. And within that context, I think we are talking about an election that is going to be, as we sit here today, what happens between now and election day, there's a lot of uncertainty. And there's even more uncertainty what will happen after election day. So I caution myself. I don't think I can caution other big men. I caution myself about predicting who will win. and want to talk more about where all of this could lead us as a nation. We are a tenuous polity, and we have always found a way to come back from the edge.
Okay.
Given the challenges, given the factors that I've outlined, one is not sure that that is a certainty.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Let's hear Ravindra Dev.
Well, we've heard, as usual, quite a mouthful from Dr. Hines, and I'll try to give my 2 cents worth. None of what David said is new or unexpected. And basically, where I see him heading with this argument is really what I've written about in the press, that the grounds from the opposition, led by Dr. Hines and members of the WPA, is to delegitimize these upcoming elections and to set the ground, I think they hope, for protests and riots in the streets after the elections. So to come to your question, which is the topic that we're discussing, what to expect, I see a continuation of what has been going on, which is that the opposition, especially, like I said, from the WPA, the tiniest of the parties in the opposition benches, but they have led this charge where they're not taking advantage of, we have spoken about again and again and again. We hear about a divided society, but as if this was something that has been set on stone when Moses walked down from the burning bush, but it is not. The divisions themselves have been protean. They've been changing. And in the change, the politics and the politician have to understand, accept, and take advantage of those changes. I return from the umpteenth advice, which is that while we may be a divided society, it's a society that is now divided into minority groups at the very worst. And at the very best, some of those minority groups have begun to understand minority politics, and they have begun to look at coalition forming, coalition building, where coalitions will represent their interest in the best way possible, in a very pragmatic sense. There has always been this discussion, and I would like to say that Roar came on the scene and for the first time explicitly talked about the divisions, talk about ethnic security dilemmas. But 1989 is not 2025. It's different. And there is no group in Guyana today who should feel threatened by the demographics that we're hearing again about this ethnically divided society. Yes, it's divided, but for anyone to prevail in any elections in Guyana, to get and to agglomerate 50% plus one, which is the rule of the game, they have to coalesce with other groups in other parties and come to that conclusion. Now, this is not, again, I repeat, this is not a theoretical formulation at an individual basis, at a personal level. I led Roar into an election in 2006, where I made, along with the WPA, along with the PNC, many of the claims that are now being made about electoral arrangements and the need for house-to-house, registration and all of that. I even went to the Square of the Revolution and spoke about these things. And since then, not only has the demographic changed, but we had many of those innovations. So if you're going to have the same kind of complaints, no matter what the innovation is to address those complaints, then we got to say that there's some rationales behind all of this. And I am again stating that the rationale, in my estimation, is to create uncertainty. Just as in 1997, there were claims that the elections were rigged, even though a forensic audit by the Cross Committee showed it was not, there were still those accusations. In 2001, the same accusations. In 2006, the same accusations. Now, after 2006,
2015, 2015,
let me
the
finish,
same accusation.
let me finish, man. I didn't
No,
interrupt
I'm
you.
helping you to
I didn't
finish.
finish until I interrupted you, man. Don't interrupt
helping you
me.
to finish.
Don't interrupt me, man. I gave you a chance.
2015.
Are you uncivilized? Did you go to school, as you like to talk about?
Yeah,
Give people a chance to talk. Give people a chance to talk about talk. Yeah, I was proceeding 2010, 2000, and 2011. Before that, I made the same points I am making now, which is that we have become a nation of minorities. Mr. Corbyn changed the whole tactic of the PNC, entered into an arrangement where there was a coalition where the PNC itself sought a fig leaf to hide itself and its sins. And out of 2011, you had then the AFC, and we saw the PPP being checkmated. As I said in 2015, to come back to what Dr. Hines is clamoring about. In 2015, you had a situation where you had a minority government coming in. So from 2015, thrown out. So you had a situation from 2015 to 2020, you had a coalition in office. I have said time and again, there's no threat to any one group. There is just the need to practice the logic of democratic politics, which is to do what is necessary to get your 50%, and you too can become the government without this kind of hysteria that is being built right now.
Okay, so if you're just joining us, you're watching Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Noir Singh. This is the 6th year, offering community service for all voices. The platform invites all political parties, civic leaders to share their opinions and addresses concerns. Globespan 24/7 is looking for sponsors. You may call 631-782-8694, or you could email support@globespan24x7.com. Individuals can go to globespan24x7.com to contribute whatever amount of money you wish. Globespan 24/7, thank you for your support. Now let's turn to Mr. Vincent Alexander. Mr. Alexander, you have heard various opinions of what to expect in 2025. What is your view? Do you have any comments on any of the things said before and your own perspective?
I will express my own perspective that may, in fact, speak to some of the things that have been said before. Let me start off by saying this. I have been previously on this program introduced with various caps. And I want to be clear tonight that I am going to speak wearing 2 caps. I want that to be very, very clear.
Okay.
I'm going to speak wearing the cap of a GCOM commissioner, and I'm going to speak wearing the cap of the chairman of the International Decade of the People of African Descent. I'm going to wear those 2 caps. And to start off by saying that, for me, it is rather unfortunate that once again Ghana is going to an election without the nation as a collective being able to come to grips with the reality of our polity, which is highly dysfunctional, and seeking to create an electoral system that will respond to the plurality of our society and the fractured nature of our society. I know my friend Ravi doesn't agree with that, but that is where I still stand on this matter. Speaking from the GCOM perspective, I don't know what to expect. Because we have an electoral system that is not only dysfunctional, as I was just attempted to say, but is highly corrupted. It's highly corrupted, and notwithstanding what people will want to say, I will challenge them to refute my contention that the system is highly corrupted. I say it is highly corrupted because on one hand, we have an electoral roll that can lend to manipulation. And on the other hand, we have evidence that there was that kind of manipulation in 2020. And I don't care what anybody says. The fact of the matter is that in 2020, the PNU AFC sought to present evidence that the system was corrupted. The extent to which the chief immigration officer responded to the information sent by GCOM suggested indeed the system was corrupted, and that there has been every attempt not to address those allegations, to the extent that the Attorney General has corralled the information, has not done what he said he would do, that is to go to the relevant authorities, which are now under their control, to have a verification done in relation to those allegations. And so we have a body of people out there who do not have faith in the system, where allegations have been leveled, and no attempt has been made to show that, to deal with those allegations against the background of evidence, the verification of those allegations, though the verification sums up to a sample, but all of the other information is available for verification, has not been verified, and therefore it has not created an environment in which there is trust in our electoral system. And there are other issues that hardens that contention. The pushback against introduction of a system that seeks to rely on fingerprint identification continues to harden the position of those who are of the view, and I am not only of the view, I'm of the conviction that there is a sinister reason as to why there's been opposition to implementation of technology that is universal, a technology which can do no harm to our electoral process and only enhance our electoral process, but is continued objection to that. And that is not the singular problem. That technology will help us with the problem of tens of thousands of overseas Guyanese who are on the voters list, for whom we have no mechanism of taking those names off, and for whom there seems to be no effort to deal with that problem, which is not unrelated to the accusations which have been leveled, and which can in fact be mitigated, if not ameliorated, by the introduction of digital identification. We have tens of thousands of persons who are on that list against the background of an accusation that there was manipulation and fraudulent voting. There are further problems, one of which is now before the court. Because the government, in its so-called reform, has removed some of the mechanisms that were in place for the conduct of our elections. And I'm going to make specific reference to one mechanism. In the past, when we did registration, there was a need for identification of the person at his or her place of residence. That has been removed. You merely have now to present yourself for registration and claim an address which is legitimate insofar as it's an address in our national system, and you're registered. And that has implications now, because when we look at our constitution, which talks about an electoral system that seeks to speak to representativeness, then we need to know that in our elections, where we have constituencies, that the people who are voting in those constituencies are in fact the residents of those constituencies seeking to identify their representatives. Our system no longer assures that the people who are voting in constituencies are residents in those constituencies, because our registration does not determine their residency. And notwithstanding the ruling of the judge, the fact of the matter is that we have, at the level of general elections, two components. The component which is the top-up, which does not require identification for constituencies, but we have the constituency which requires such identification. And when one takes into consideration what we have seen in the registration process, where, for example, people are brought back from Nigeria to register, and they have a right to register, they're Guyanese, but it is contended that the majority of them may not be residents in the place where they've been registered, specifically quarantine. One can see what is happening to our electoral system and the manipulation which is taking place. So it's not only a question of manipulation of the list for fraudulent voting, but it's a question of manipulation of residency to beef up areas where there have been changes in population to lend to dominance and victory in those areas. And that's a matter which, in fact, is presently before the court. So that I have a difficulty in looking down the road to ask the question, what will be the outcome, as seems to be the focus of some in the elections? Because my question is, are we going to have elections that can stand the test of a free and fair election? And I'm of the view that all of the maladies and anomalies which we are insisting should not be addressed poses the big question as to whether the election can be free and fair. So whilst on one hand, I do not see the relevance of elections given the plurality and the need for our electoral system to address that plurality in a manner that puts up a government that represents the interests of all of the people, that puts up a government that does not allow the level of exclusion that presently takes place, and therefore the absence of representation for a large part of our population. Our electoral system does not provide for that kind of government. And we have had a situation where there's been tremendous exclusion over the last 4 years. And therefore, I'm saying that we should be concerned about the relevance of the electoral system in those circumstances. And separate and apart from the relevance of the electoral system, we should be concerned about an electoral system that guarantees us free and fair elections, an electoral system in which people have trust, and neither of the two are present. And therefore, for me, the issue is not the outcome of the elections. The issue is what will the people think or do about an election that has all of those question marks over it. And they may even think or do the things I'm asking about after elections, but are already thinking about them before elections, because there are so many people who are raising the questions about the system and the predictability of the outcome, given the nature of the system, that they have no interest in the elections under the present system, and may be looking to other things for the solution to their concerns and their problems. And so that is where I stand. Those who will say that we have gotten to the point of mature politics and all of that, there ain't no maturity in the manner in which we are treating the electoral system. And whether it's a majority or a minority, there are a sufficient number of people who are complaining about the status quo for us to be concerned about their right as electors at the 2025 elections. The system is not ready to produce a free and fair election. We have not addressed issues that ought to be addressed. And even where there's been reform, the reform has sought to make the system worse, bearing in mind that there are some other tangential things that are of concern. Of concern would be the system for which we now grant registration of births, which can easily allow for further contamination, in fact, even if not in law, of our electoral rules. So that's another big problem that we face with in terms of the electoral rule. And so this argument that people want to legitimize the election results is fraught. It's fraught with the deficiencies, because there's a much that's happening that in fact can only lend to the electoral results and the whole system being legitimized, delegitimized.
Thank you. You are watching Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh. Globespan 24/7 is looking for sponsors. You may call 631-782-8694 or go by email to support@globespan24x7.com. Dr. Ramarak, the three preceding speakers spoke about different issues pertaining to the 2025 elections, what to expect. Mr. Vincent Alexander is asserting that the GCOM is not ready to produce free and fair elections. He feels somehow the system is replete with various flaws, and that you will not have free and fair election. How do you assess what Mr. Alexander says, and what is your view?
You know, among the five of us here, only Vincent is a member of GCOM, right? And I think that conversation should be more relevant with the people in GCOM. There were reports in the newspaper by some people who have challenged some of the things that Vincent have put forward, things like biometrics and the whole notion that GCOM is not ready. So there is an alternative view to that. Right. And there are other issues also concerned that have been raised, which is the fact that, yes, we're concerned about people coming back from Venezuela and Suriname and so on, but a lot of those people are also Guyanese. But let me just say this. We know these are not, some of these are not new issues that are floating around. We know for a fact that they were members of GCOM, right? In fact, Vincent was on a program with me, with Ropes and Ben, and we addressed some of these issues. And one of the things that Ropes and Ben pointed out was the fact that 95%, and I think that was a number that he threw out, of the people in GCOM was slanted to one side. It did not reflect the population of the country. We know for a fact that there are members of GCOM who are involved in the last election are before the courts. Now, let me say this about 2015. During that election, we know there was an election petition that was filed. Now, in that election, Ramatar did not create a fuss as we see in 2020, right? He made a decision that, look, the election results is this, so therefore I'm going to relinquish power. He didn't say, oh, I'm going to try a thing and let me see if I can hold on to power and see if he can stay in power for as long as we could. So to his credit, that's what happened in 2015. There was no attempt to hold on to power in a collaborative effort by members of the ruling party, AFC, as well as members of GCOM, who were fully embedded in trying to create a scenario, an alternative scenario with facts that happened then, right? And again, my point is, Vincent is giving us one scenario, but there are others in GCOM who have, in a sense, opposed to some of the things that he has mentioned here today. Now, hopefully, GCOM can resolve some of these issues, right? The other issues that seems to be prevailing issues. And I think that's why we have those members in GCOM. So we would have to have a look at those alternative views that they're presenting. And we know some of them have already been presented. My point here, and this is my concern, which is that we're living in a situation where we're seeing things continuously being repeated, and every election, right, there's a contention that the election was rigged, right? So we have that scenario continuously being played out. And my concern here is that, look, when you look at, let's say, 2015, right, 2020, we saw some things that were unique to those elections. One of the things we have pointed out on this show before was the fact that one of the reasons why Granger, leading that coalition, was able to win that election was because, A, he formed a coalition, right, with other opposing forces. Secondly, Granger made a decision that he's not going to have street protests, right, because we know what happened when those things get out of hand. And the third thing was the rhetoric, the language that was being used. So there was a deliberate decision made to come up with that strategy to ensure that there was an election where the opposition won that election. My concern here is that when we do agree on these things and we play by a set of rules, then when you lose the election, you now want to change the rules of the game. 2020 is a living example of what we're seeing. We don't have to go back to 23 years or 28 years, right, and look at what was happening in Ghana. 2020 is a living example for many of those people who don't have that historical baggage of experiencing what happened so far back in the past. So my point is simply this. I don't care what we do here or what we say here, and what David may say or Vincent may say about GCOM and what's going to happen and the concerns. Those concerns hopefully are going to work themselves out. But I am convinced of two things here. One, which is that if and when the opposition loses this election, they are going to create an unstable situation. This was done before with Janet Jagan, with the protests that lead to a situation where her term was truncated, right? And I think the rhetoric that we're seeing today is, in a sense, creating an environment for those things to happen. Now, we're seeing situation with this young lady from the United States, Nellie Mel. She's no, Mother Teresa. But I think what the opposition is trying to do is to use incidents like these to kind of create that situation and to build up that scenario that, hey, the PPP is engaged in an attempt to rig that election. And I think when those votes are cast in November, you're going to see those kinds of protests. And I think this is what the opposition is leading to. Those kinds of protests, using all the examples of what Vincent had suggested previously, right? To suggest that the plan was in place, this thing was rigged, and therefore we need to take to the streets. And I think that is where this is heading.
Dr. Hines, Dr. Ramark is saying that he sees trouble ahead. There will be protests and violence. You agree?
Dr. Ramarak. maybe seeing something that I am not seeing. Let me apologize to Ravi there for interrupting.
Okay, let's carry on.
Whether that amounts to me being unschooled and uncivilized is another matter.
Okay.
But I have lived long enough to know the origins of those sentiments. Look, I belong to a small party. Ravi there founded a small party. There was a time when Ravi and I, as small party people, could have a conversation about our country. The fact that today, these two small party people can't have a conversation about what's happening in our country speaks to the deterioration of political and ethnic relations in our country. Ravi and I we haven't dropped from the sky. We are part and parcel of the political discourse, public discourse in our country. And the fact that today we cannot agree on one sentence is itself an indictment of where we have gone. And that is why I have a difficulty with these conversations. When I come here, I don't come here to beat up the PPP. But if I come here and people are beating up the WPA and the opposition to which I belong, I will have no alternative than to beat up on the PPP for whom Ravi and others are fronting. And that is not the conversation I want to have here. I will have that conversation somewhere else, not here. No, I was merely trying, when I was interrupting Ravi, to say, Ravi, from 1964 to the present, every losing party has rejected the election results. The PPP rejected results from 64 right up to 1985. The PNC has rejected results from 85 onwards. In 2015, the PPP rejected the results. Mr. Ramatar never conceded those elections. And it is not true that he did not try to hold up the elections. He tried to prevail on the chairman of GCOM to open the boxes and recount the votes. Had the chairman of GCOM opened those boxes, we would have had the same 5-month scenario as we had in 2020. To sit here and to blame somebody in 2020 for creating a situation when that situation has been a constant in our politics. That's all I was trying to say. Ravi, you went to school, and I will never question your scholarship and scholarliness. And you know what happens when you are selective in making these arguments. Both sides have rejected elections results. Both sides have taken to the streets after the election in 2020. When PPP members feared that PPP was losing, they took to the streets at Bad Settlement, at Butchlot, and Lusignan. After the 1973 election, the PPP mounted a boycott. They didn't go to parliament. They asked their people to engage in civil disobedience. Do not sit here and make it look as though one side does something when both sides do it. It incenses me when people do that, because we can't have a conversation. Now, let me address this question of 50 plus 1. 50 plus 1, in 1964, the PPP rejected the electoral rules. They rejected the electoral rules. And what followed after that election was that the party in power, the party that took power, the PNC with the US, decided, look, we are going to put our own logic to 50+1. And we know what ensued. Once that party decided that it is going to put its logic to 50+1. I happen to come into politics fighting against that logic of 50+1. That is taking the winner-take-all system and imposing a 50+1 on it. I fought against the consequences of that. When other people were doing other things. And now the other party is in power, and it is imposing its own logic of 50+1. I am rejecting that. What minorities do, the PNC's constituency was a minority from 64 to 92, and it manufactured 50+1. The PPP's constituency is now a minority, and it follows the same logic of manufacturing 50+1. That is the challenge we face as a country. And I cannot legitimize a 50+1 approach in a vulnerable society like ours. People feel that you can catch a 5% from the other side and solve the problem. I have 50+5. I have 50+1. Story is over. What about the other 45? What about the other 45? They are not part of the solution. I continue to believe that in addition to the challenges that Vincent raised, and I think they're real challenges, and it's a shame that after 60-odd years of independence, we have not worked out the rules. Betoram likes to talk about agreeing to the rules and rejecting it after. Dr. Jagan didn't agree to the rules in 64. The opposition is not agreeing to the rules in 2020. And to want to go into an election, rejecting that as nonsense, as people want to create riots and all of that. What will riots do? What will riots do to any ethnic group in Guyana today? All it would mean is that we will fight each other and others will come and take away our country. For Ravi to sit here and to say my small party, my little party, tiny, just like he party, tiny, my tiny party wants to create riot is an insult to me and members of my party as nationalists who have fought hard to hold this society together, who have sacrificed our lives and our liberty to hold this society together. Let me make it plain here today. I do not want to see riots. If the coalition wins, the no opposition wins, the PPP is going to reject the results. And they are likely to take to the streets. The PPP leaders already said that this is not the old PPP. This is a new PPP that will fight. Either side wins under the present conditions. It is not going to end well, to quote Dr. Keith Rowley. So this is not about, some people are so certain that the opposition will lose because maybe there's some manifest destiny that says the government side is destined to win. And so therefore, don't even consider the PPP losing. I am considering the PPP could lose in a 50+1 game. The coalition could lose in a 50+1 game. And the country is not going to be the better for it. So let us try to reset our conversation rather than to come here and to root for one party or the other. I belong to a party. I belong to the opposition. I know when to root for the opposition and when not to. And this is not a platform, as far as I see it, to come here and root for one side or the other. Any rooting I'm rooting for holding Guyana together.
All right, let's hear Ravi now. Ravi, your response?
Well, since David personalized it to a certain extent, let me start there. That roar, I am personally, as an individual, I am not a member of any party. As David reminds us, I was a member of a small party, Roar, but it was an opposition party. And as a member of that opposition, I played a very active role in the politics of that area and was there. So I was there when so many things happened. And I want to repeat myself. I participated in questioning the rules of the game as an opposition party. When I spoke at the City Hall in 2004, I spoke, I think it was called the Trotman led that movement, Liberty and Justice or something like that. David and I spoke at the Square of the Revolution on the same matter, that we must have reform. And it led to house-to-house registration in 2007 and 8. I think it was completed in 8 and we had election because the claim then was that the list was padded and the list had to be purified and so on and so forth. But that was taken care of. But I want to repeat myself because it doesn't seem to sink in enough with my interlocutors here, which is that the demographics have changed. So if you're not going to change your strategy and your tactics based on these objective conditions, then you are dooming yourself to failure. And this has been my constant refrain in all my writings, that I am a firm believer in the system of democracy where the governing party at any time, I don't care who it is constituted with, I believe that power corrupts, and the whole thing of absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is where other parties come in. So I see it as absolutely an imperative for us to go forward and develop our country, to have a two-party system at a minimum. So the party in government doesn't get away with it. But the politics that is played, if you are going to keep on tearing down the house, the scaffolding of the house that you are saying you want to build, then something is wrong. And this is what I see David and the members of the WPA are doing at this stage. They are constantly trying to destroy the scaffolding. And this scaffolding is not new. Like I said, only in 2011 and then in 2015, it worked. And I always say it, I say that it is very, very possible for the PPP to lose the elections in 2025. There is, I mean, as a sociologist, it is shown that not because the PPP is giving out handouts because of this oil wealth or whatever wealth, that was always there. Tammany Hall politics was always there back in the 19th century in America, where quote unquote democracy grew. It will be there, but what is shown, the dynamics themselves is created where when you give out, the other guy down the street is dissatisfied. He didn't get as much. Why did that guy? So within the PPP constituency, there is a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction that if the opposition can get its act together, and for example, if R.B. Norton is not undercut by people like David Hines again and again for not supporting street protests, for emasculating him, where he has said that, well, he's trying for votes across the normal constituency. He is belittled. He's being seen as unrealistic. He's being seen as pandering, all those names. And therefore, he is allowing, and this is a term that I really have a problem with, he's allowing slave catchers to be within his midst. Now, what kind of logic is that in a situation where you need to get back into office, to show that you too have a vision for Guyana, and therefore you must follow the rules of the game? I accept what Vincent is saying to a great extent in terms of reforms. I fought for some of those returns. I want to repeat, like for House to House, when back in the 2000s, when PPP fought it tooth and nail. But the point is that the opposition keeps on coming up with these new things. To take, for example, biometrics. Ghana initiated biometrics. They said in 2012, and I saw an article written by the opposition that they did it in 6 weeks or so. But Ghana had over a decade of preparatory work where that was a culmination. A better example would be Mozambique, that had spent hundreds of millions of dollars to introduce biometrics, but biometrics and the system that biometrics support itself can be manipulated. Check the example of Mozambique. You know, there's always you can game that system. The point is, my dear brothers, and all of us, I see us as brothers. We may disagree, but we are brothers. We are Guyanese brothers. That, you know, back in India, when India got independence, they talked about the constitution that the untouchable Ambedkar created for India. And he said, you can create all the constitutions what you want, but if good men do not execute that constitution, you get nowhere. And the same thing I want to say with our electoral system. Of course, we need to keep on improving it, but that is a symptom. It is not the cause. The cause of it, and I say this, I would like my brothers in the opposition, I never cease from being in the opposition. I am not a member of the PPP. And I would say that I still see myself as a figure in the opposition camp because I think we need that opposition. I would say, please take a deep breath. And within the rules of the game, the opposition can still win the next elections if it can get its act together. But the way it is going, by tearing down the leader of the largest party in Guyana, that has, to me, a legitimacy to lead the opposition, I think we're doing ourselves any good.
Vincent, Alexander?
Well, you know, my friend Beto, in some regards, started to trivialize my contention. My contentions are, first of all, is about the usefulness of elections in the context of the plural society. That is not an argument that necessarily comes from any opposition party. That is my disposition. But when I speak to things like the registration, and Beto trivialize it, it's to blindfold himself to the realities that we're trying to talk about. So let me be a bit more explicit. We have an electoral system that provides for, in local government elections, constituencies. In regional elections, the regions are themselves constituencies. In national elections, we have 10 constituencies. When you, for example, in local elections, because the issue arises as how we do in registration. When in local elections, you don't determine who are the real residents of the local area and the constituencies in the local area, then you can move people from an adjacent electoral area where you have an overwhelming majority into the neighboring area where you may have 50-50 or a marginal majority to ensure that you win that area.
Mhm.
But the people themselves are not living, they're just registered in that area. And the changing of the law, this is not what has been there all the time. The law has been changed to remove the requirement to be identified in your place of residence. And that is a new facilitator. That is a new facilitator that erodes systems that we have put in place. For example, the constituency system that only came into operation in the 21st century. That wasn't there all the time. This constituency system in relation to national elections, that only came after 2001. So to tell me that, this is the same old thing we complain about is not true. I am speaking to facts of the matter. And whilst I may agree with Ravi that some of these, what the electoral issue is a symptom of the problem and not in itself the problem, I have contended that the whole electoral system is irrelevant because I know that elections are not what we need to deal with our reality. But this symptom that we're referring to, however, if that symptom is dealt with, then the jockeying on the real cause becomes more difficult. And so, yes, we have to deal with the real cause. And in tonight's discussion, I'm probably the only one who has gone down that road. But at the same time, if you don't deal with the symptoms, what you do is to reinforce those who have held on and are perpetuating the cause. And so to deal with the symptom will in fact change, in some regards, the environment. And therefore I come to the point where it is contended that the environment has changed. The demographics is that aspect which have changed. And I'm arguing that these measures, how we deal with birth certificates, how we deal with registration, etc., and the fact that we are allowing the dead overseas persons to remain in the list are attempts to confront the changed environment. So that in a sense, there are those who are attempting to go back to the original environment by these mechanisms. And so that reality of a changed environment is being undermined. And so you cannot use the argument of that changed environment in the face of it being undermined by mechanisms like how we deal with birth certificates, like how we deal with registration, and like how we deal with the list. Three things that cannot be refuted. We can't refute the fact that in Guyana, a country where corruption is endemic, that we are now allowing people to get birth certificates by an attestation by some official. So we're creating citizens. We have this situation where we can create citizens to vote. We can't refute the fact that we are now doing registration where you don't have to reside in the place, and therefore you can manipulate the numbers, but particularly in local and regional elections. and also in the constituency elections. And we can't deny the fact that nobody has been able to push back on the accusation of fraudulent voting. Nobody's pushed back on that, you know. Nandalal has taken the evidence and corralled it and not come forward to say, here, I'm in charge of this system. We have gone to immigrations and we have refuted this accusation. When in fact, the sample, 2 of many, showed that there were votes cast for people who were not in the country. Refute that. You are in a position to do it. And I cannot think otherwise than that you have an interest in maintaining the status quo. And maintain the status quo means pushing back against the reality by these things which I have referenced. So my position is clear. 1, our system is irrelevant to the plurality of our society. And 2, things are being done to maintain that status quo which some people are saying has changed. And the things which are being done are ensuring that there is no trust in the system and therefore undermines the legitimacy of the system. And just let me en passant say, and I'm speaking both to David and to Ravi here, that if I'm not mistaken, in the 2000 elections which Corbyn lost, the PNC did not do anything whatsoever to contest those results. The election that Corbyn lost, let's go back in history. The PNC did nothing to contest those elections. And the elections that were up in the air in 2020, nobody wants to contend. Nobody wants to admit what took place in terms of riots. In fact, the rioting started right in GCOM itself, some of which is now being revealed in the court case. The rioting started in GCOM itself. The fact of the matter is, if GCOM had proceeded the way in which we're supposed to proceed, Mingo's results could have been contested in GCOM. Mingo's results were not final results. Final results have to come to GCOM to be determined. We never allowed that to happen. But we're hanging on to the Mingo thing as if that was the ultimate rigging had taken place. We did not allow GCOM system to function the way in which it was intended to function. And the interventions came before that, and the recount came in the face of that. But when the recount came, we refused to accept things that were revealed in the recount and only contend that the recount is because of some wrongdoing of Mingo, and that no attention should be paid to things that were the outcome of the recount, which have not been addressed.
Okay, so Vincent, any other final point? Because we won't have time to get back to you for another round.
Well, I really don't need the final points because my main point is, 1, I am not looking towards the outcome of these elections because the outcome, left, right, or center, given the electoral system and given the nature of governance, does not address the needs of this nation for us to normalize democracy. It does not address those needs. But even in the instance where you're going to have elections, that those elections also, separate and apart from the irrelevance of the elections, are being conducted in such a manner that they become the source of a problem. So we got two problems. We got the problem of plurality, we're not addressing it. And then we got the problem of conduct of elections, which we're not addressing. So we are not committed. We are not committed to building a nation called Guyana.
Okay, so gentlemen, the remaining three speakers, Dr. Ramrat, Dr. Hines, Ravi Dev, can you just take a minute or two for your final points, please? Professor Ramrat first.
Here's the craziness about what we're talking about here. And again, I think some of those issues that Vincent raised, I'm sure are being discussed in GCOM. But here's the tragedy about all of this. Everything we discuss here, even if it's theoretical, it's about winning elections. That is the bottom line. How do we get there and what happened after is the bottom line. It's about winning election. The reality of all of this is that in 2020, APNU AFC accepted the vote as of March 2nd, I believe. Then they changed the rule. And by the way, I know Timothy Jonas also said that the elections were free and fair, right? Then the rules were changed to accept Mingo's results on a spreadsheet. So I go back to the point I made originally that you play by one set of rules, then you want to delegitimize the election, burn the ballot boxes, and form a government around Granger, a power sharing government. So you're trying to change the rules of the game. My point is, despite all of these things that are being done, and even if they're being done as Vincent laid them out, you are still going to have results that the PNC will not be willing to accept. And I will put David in that group also. A couple of things I want to say in ending my part here. One is that I do not speak for the PPP. I believe that when I said originally at the outset of this program that I believe the PPP will win, part of that analysis is based on the fact that the opposition is very much disorganized. They are not ready for prime time. Based on all the things that they have done and the conditions that existed in 2015 are not there. And that is where my fear lies, because when they lose, and if they lose, we're going to have problem during that election. But here's where I agree with David, which is that, yes, and Vincent, we do have a divided society. But I don't think it's as divided in the way that it is being presented by the rhetoric that we're hearing, that it's an apartheid state or it's an emerging apartheid state, it's a fascist state. And that's the rhetoric that we're hearing. Now, there are people, and this is where it gets a little crazy. They talk about people like James Bond, Leonard Craig, Roy Johnson, and all of these folks who are supporting the government, right? But you have attempts, when it seems like one side is trying to bring people together, you have the other side trying to tear that system down by delegitimizing those who are, in a sense, trying to hold things together or working to hold things together. But here is where I think David will agree with me, and maybe Vincent. It would be a great thing, and I think this is where the PPP has failed. It would be a good thing, I believe, that if we have this ethnic caucus that we have been talking about, so when James Bond go out there and promote the PPP rally at Babu Jan, maybe James Bond and others could say, look, let's form an ethnic caucus within this PPP government and convince them to have that caucus so they can address the ethnic question that is dear to their heart. And that caucus could include an Indian, maybe like Mr. Ravi Dev, an Amerindian, a Chinese, a Portuguese, because here, if we were different communities, different races, if we can get to that point, instead of calling James Bond and Uncle Tom and all of these other names that I don't want to mention, that would be a situation where I think all sides, including the PPP, has failed. And I think that will get us, hopefully, move the needle towards that point where we want to get to, as opposed to tearing down the system.
All right, let's hear David.
Mr. Jagdeo is legitimizing Mohammed. No, Mr. Jack Deere is not calling Mohammed names. Oh no, oh no, oh no. He's saying, oh, come, Mr. Mohammed, take my votes. Pickpocket politics. Pickpocket politics on both sides. And both sides are rejecting the pickpocket politics that Rafi is talking about. All right? You know, I like the colorful language, and I might get in trouble with calling pickpocket politics. That is what it is. And Betoram, cast your gaze on both sides. I cannot begin to call James B. system perfect. You cannot want to have an ill-fitted system and have it imperfect and dysfunctional, to use Vincent Storm. If I don't want to hold on to that system, it should go. All right? But insofar as people want to hold on to it, it must be perfect. It must be perfect. Whether 10% of the population disagrees with it or 49%, that is enough to delegitimize it. I don't have to delegitimize the system. The system in itself is not legitimate given the nature of our society. And that is why for long I have advocated along with others for a change system that could be more functional in our environment. And I repeat, if you want to hold on to that system, make it perfect. I don't know how you will do it, but make it perfect. I want to close by saying that for me, if we are a nation of minorities, that is such a good thing. Let us hold hands as minorities and create a super majority of all of us. Don't put your hand in my pocket and try to steal my 5 cents to go along with you 46 cents to put you to 51. That's banditry. Let us, as a nation of minorities, hold our hands and say, we all have a stake in this country. And let us bring our strengths along with our weaknesses to the table and try to create a system and a political culture that is inclusive in the real sense. Inclusive based on equity, based on equality, not on pickpocket. When you steal my 5 cents to give you 51 cents, you are enraging me. And I am going to try to now steal 10 cents from you. It is pickpocket politics. I'm sorry, Ravi. I'm sorry. I hope that very soon you return to the politics of real inclusivity. Whether we are a nation of minorities or we are a nation with a slight majority, the ethnic relations have not changed. However much Beto may wish it changes. And I wish that somebody can take a magic wand and say, look, you all are changed now, kiss one another. It is not happening. All we are doing is seeking to steal from each other a couple pennies to create this majority. And what we are doing in short order and in the long term is instead of making the problem less, we are enhancing the problem because you're enraging the side that you're trying to steal from. And as the PPP is finding out, when one of their own going now and steal from them, he can't read and write, he can't string thing, he's a this, he's a that.
All right, let's say Ravi there. Ravi, final comment, please. Ravi?
Have you muted?
Yeah, let me begin by apologizing to David. As he reminded me, it did not occur to me when the word blurted out, but as he reminded me to use the word uncivilized to a person of African heritage is beyond the pale, and I apologize for using that word. I did not mean it in the sense of which you took it and which it can be taken. So again, my apologies for that. The other one would be in terms of, but along the same lines, I find David's use of the term before as to how he cuss out Black people as BT lickers and what have you, and how he called people house slaves, which is very mild. I would like to remind him that both Toussaint Louverture and Coffee were house slaves. And there's nothing ontologically deficient in somebody who was a house slaves. As I said, two of the greatest who led revolutions in the West were both house slaves and benefited from that position. So again, but in the same mold, I really resent him referring to Blacks, as he just did, as people stealing 5 cents from his pocket. That indicates that 5 cents is yours, it's in your pocket. It shows ownership. And just as how he reminded me of the use of the word uncivilized in terms of African experience out of Africa, I would remind him the same notion should be abjured when he talks of owning people from the African community. Nobody owns these people. And to see these people like James Bond or all the other people in IFLUT that I talked to, or in Shortfill, or in Borganuccian, who I see have now signed up to the other side. And I wouldn't call them, because nobody owns them. They are nobody 5 cents in anybody's pocket. They are human beings, and we have to give them that honor, that as human beings, they have the right to make their own choice. And that's the word, choice. They are making, that is the essence of what emancipation is all about. If they are not free to make their own choice, whatever that choice may be, we may differ, we may disagree vehemently with that choice, but that is what freedom is all about. And lastly, I would say this, in David's call for absolute perfection in the voting arrangements, there is no such thing. Immanuel Kant from the West talks about out of this crooked timber we have been created. That within the human condition, there are certain aspects of that condition which makes us, he calls it crooked timber, but go awry. In my own Hindu philosophy, it is a given that we are an admixture of 4 gunas, we call them, latent qualities, right? The French social scientist calls it their habitus, you know. But whatever you call it, we come into this world, it is seen. And in the African condition and in the African philosophy, that is also the reality, that there is no such thing as perfection. So to the best of our ability, we use what we have. And I am not totally unhappy that the liberal order is crumbling, because they would like, the West like to take this liberal order and pretend that they were practicing it when they enslaved us and when they indentured us. No, there's no perfectibility, but when we begin to accept that, then we become more conscious of taking time, taking caution to work with each other. And I would like to leave David with that I still do believe that there is time enough between now and the elections for the opposition to get behind a common ideology, a common position, accept ethnic caucuses, accept the pluralities of views. And I do think that there is enough dissatisfied voters on both sides of the divide for either side to come out in 2025 winners. But the fact that they chose to reach across the divide, it will be winners that are inclusive. Thank you. Not perfect, but inclusive.
Well, thank you. That'll be the final word. Thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us. You have been watching Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Noor Singh. Globespan 24/7 is seeking sponsors for its program. You may call 631-782-8694. This has been a free program. It's open to political parties and civic groups. You may also want to send an email at support at globespan24x7.com. You may pledge your support, financial support there of any amount. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, ladies and gentlemen. And also our panelists this evening, thank you for taking your time out of your very, very important busy schedule for this program of what to expect in 2025 general elections. That will be all for tonight. Thank you and good night.